In the heart of the Arabian desert, during a time when power, lineage, and tribal pride defined a person's worth, a man of African descent lived in chains. His name was Bilal Ibn Rabah. Born into slavery, his skin was dark, his status low, and his future, by the standards of that society, was bleak. He had no tribe to defend him, no wealth to shield him, and no freedom to call his own. Yet his story would echo through the centuries, not because of worldly possessions or status, but because of his unshakable faith and spiritual courage. Bilal's life began in the shadows, overlooked and oppressed, but it would rise to shine among the brightest lights in Islamic history. In a society where slaves were seen as little more than property, Bilal's soul was already free. Deep within him stirred a yearning for truth, something beyond the idols and traditions of Mecca. And when the message of Islam first whispered its call through the streets of that ancient city, Bilal heard it. Not with his ears alone, but with a heart that had been searching for something more. What follows is not simply the biography of a man. It is a testimony to the transformative power of belief. Bilal, once dragged across the hot sands in chains, would become the first man to raise his voice in the call to prayer. His cry of Allahu Akbar would not only break the silence of dawn, but shatter centuries of injustice, reminding all who heard it that in the eyes of God, a former slave could stand taller than kings. This is the inspiring story of Bilal Ibn Rabah, the first Muezzin of Islam, a man whose voice still echoes in the hearts of millions. Bilal Ibn Rabah was born in the ancient lands of Abyssinia, modern-day Ethiopia, to a humble and devout family. His early years were marked not by freedom and joy, but by hardship and captivity. As a young boy, he was torn away from his homeland and sold into slavery, eventually ending up in the city of Mecca, a bustling center of commerce and idol worship. There, he became the property of Umayyah ibn Khalaf, one of the wealthiest and most ruthless men among the Quraysh. Under his master's control, Bilal lived a life of silence and servitude, his days consumed by the demands of others, and his nights spent in quiet sorrow. In Mecca, slaves were treated with little regard. They had no voice, no rights, and were often abused for the smallest mistakes. Bilal, being of African origin, was further marginalized by the color of his skin. He was an outsider in every way, racially, socially, and spiritually. Yet in the depths of his heart, he carried a strength that could not be extinguished. His demeanor was calm, his eyes held a quiet dignity, and even those who mistreated him sensed that there was something different about him. Though his body was enslaved, Bilal's spirit was never truly broken. He watched the people of Mecca bow before lifeless idols, offering sacrifices to stones and wood, while injustice and inequality plagued every corner of society. He worked without complaint, his silence speaking volumes. But deep inside, he longed for a truth that would set his soul free. He had no idea that his quiet yearning would one day lead him to the greatest truth of all, the oneness of God. As he labored in the scorching heat and followed the commands of a merciless master, the seeds of destiny were already being sown. Bilal did not yet know that the day would come when his name would be spoken with reverence, that he would rise from the dust of slavery to become a symbol of faith, equality, and unshakable devotion. For now, he waited in silence, his heart strong, his faith not yet spoken, but already present. The chains around his wrists would not hold forever. Something far greater was coming. In the stillness of Mecca's nights, when the city rested under the blanket of stars, whispers began to stir. A new message was quietly spreading, one that spoke not of idols and bloodlines, but of the oneness of God, of justice, and of a day when every soul would be held accountable, not for its status, but for its deeds. This message came from a man named Muhammad, known for his truthfulness, humility, and unmatched character. And though few had the courage to follow him openly, hearts throughout Mecca were stirring, drawn by something deeper than words. Bilal Ibn Rabah was among those whose heart could no longer ignore that whisper. Though he was a slave with no freedom, no wealth, and no place in the circles of influence, he was drawn to the truth of Islam, with a power that could not be resisted. He had lived all his life under the shadow of injustice and falsehood. Now he had found something pure, something untainted. The message of Islam spoke to him not just as a religion, but as liberation for the soul. In the secrecy of the early Muslim gatherings, Bilal found his people. They were not defined by tribe or class, but by belief. He saw in their eyes a love that was unknown to Mecca's cold system, a love for truth, for each other, and for the one true God. And in this quiet revolution, he embraced Islam. No grand ceremony, no announcement, just a decision between his heart and his Creator, a quiet surrender that carried with it eternal power. Bilal kept his faith hidden, for to reveal it would mean unimaginable torture. But the truth had already taken root, and like a seed beneath the surface, it began to grow. He walked the streets of Mecca as a slave, but within him stirred the spirit of a believer. His prayers were whispered in secret, his eyes lifted in hope when no one was watching. The world still saw a servant of Umayyah, but the heavens saw a servant of Allah. He knew the day would come when silence would no longer be enough, when belief would demand voice, action, and sacrifice. And when that day arrived, Bilal would rise, not with weapons or wealth, but with a word so powerful it would shake the very heart of Mecca. The day Bilal's faith was discovered marked the beginning of one of the most brutal chapters of his life. Umayyah ibn Khalaf, a man whose pride rested in idols and whose heart knew no mercy, saw Bilal's conversion as a betrayal not only to his authority, but to the traditions of Mecca itself. Islam was seen as a threat, something that dared to challenge the structure of tribal supremacy and idol worship. For a man like Bilal to turn away from the gods of his master and bow only to one unseen God was unthinkable. And so, Umayyah resolved to break him. They dragged him to the open desert, the sun above blazing with merciless fire. They stripped him of his garments, leaving his skin exposed to the scorching sand. His dark body burned under the relentless sun, but his soul remained untouched. Umayyah ordered a massive stone to be placed upon his chest, heavy enough to crush a man's will, if not his bones. And while others cursed, spat, and demanded he recant his belief, Bilal uttered a single word over and over again: Ahad, Ahad, one, one. They beat him, whipped him, mocked him, but the word never changed. His lips were dry, cracked from thirst. His voice trembled with pain, but it carried strength that none could understand. The people of Mecca watched in disbelief. A man who owned nothing, no family to protect him, no wealth to ransom him, no title to defend him, was defying one of the most powerful men in the city. And all he had was a single word: Ahad. With each repetition, Bilal declared the truth of monotheism, not just as a theological concept, but as a living fire that burned in his heart. To him, the idea that Allah was one, without partner or equal, was more real than the pain surging through his body. And though the chains dug into his skin and the rocks pressed into his bones, Bilal was freer than his tormentors could ever be. His body belonged to Umayyah, but his soul belonged to Allah. No one could comprehend such resilience. Slaves had begged for mercy for less. Yet here was Bilal, refusing to bend. His faith was not loud, but it was unshakable. In those moments, he became more than a man. He became a symbol of resistance, of belief, and of the human spirit when lifted by divine truth. Word of Bilal's suffering reached the Prophet Muhammad and his companions, and hearts ached for the pain their brother endured. But Bilal himself did not ask for rescue. He asked only to continue bearing witness to the One. His body was bruised, but his spirit stood tall. And while Mecca's elites saw a disobedient slave, the angels saw a hero of heaven. As the sun scorched the sands of Mecca and the cries of torture echoed through its streets, a noble heart could no longer bear the injustice. Abu Bakr as-Siddiq, the closest companion of the Prophet Muhammad and among the wealthiest and most respected men of Quraysh, heard of Bilal's torment. His soul trembled with sorrow and anger. A man of deep compassion and unwavering belief, Abu Bakr could not remain still while his brother in faith was being crushed beneath the cruelty of ignorance. He went straight to the place where Bilal lay, his body broken, his skin raw, his lips whispering, "Ahad, Ahad." The sight of Bilal's suffering pierced Abu Bakr's heart. This was no ordinary man before him. This was a soul illuminated by truth, one who had endured what many would not survive, all for the sake of believing in the one God. And so, Abu Bakr approached Umayyah with a clear demand. Bilal must be freed. Umayyah, proud and bitter, scoffed at the request. He knew the value of a strong slave, and if he was to give him up, it would not come cheap. But Abu Bakr was not concerned with wealth. He offered a sum so great that even Umayyah, greedy as he was, could not refuse. With gold in his hand and arrogance in his voice, Umayyah laughed and said Bilal was worth far less than the price. But Abu Bakr, with dignity and certainty, replied, "If you had asked for 100 times more, I would have paid it." In that moment, the chains that had bound Bilal were removed, not just from his body, but from his destiny. He rose from the ground, not as a slave, but as a free man in the eyes of both the world and the heavens. His first steps as a free believer were taken with humility and strength, his heart overflowing with gratitude, not toward Abu Bakr alone, but toward Allah, who had written freedom for his soul. Bilal's story was no longer one of pain alone. It had now become one of redemption, of divine justice, and of a friendship between two men bound not by blood or race, but by the love of God and the truth of Islam. After gaining his freedom, Bilal did not retreat into comfort or anonymity. Instead, he stepped forward with greater purpose, walking alongside the earliest Muslims with quiet strength and unwavering dedication. Though once viewed as a lowly slave, Bilal was now embraced as a brother in faith, equal in worth and dignity. The Prophet Muhammad held him in the highest regard, recognizing not only his bravery, but the depth of his sincerity. Bilal's place in the Muslim community was not one granted by status or wealth, but by the beauty of his character and the purity of his belief. In the growing Muslim society of Medina, Bilal became known for his devotion and service. He was always present in the company of the Prophet, learning, supporting, and giving whatever he could for the sake of Allah. He took part in the most critical events in Islamic history, not as a background figure, but as an active participant whose faith never wavered. When the call to arms echoed before the Battle of Badr, Bilal stood ready. Though his former master, Umayyah ibn Khalaf, was among the enemy ranks, Bilal faced the battlefield with courage, standing for the truth he had once suffered for. The chains that had once bound him now seemed like distant memories compared to the honor of defending the message of Islam. Bilal's daily life was filled with humility. He never sought recognition, never claimed greatness, yet greatness followed him. The Prophet entrusted him with various responsibilities, and Bilal fulfilled each task with dedication. He became known for his piety, his gentle nature, and his deep love for Allah and his messenger. Wherever Bilal went, he reminded others that Islam had come to uplift the downtrodden, to erase the lines of race and class, and to honor the human soul. People from all walks of life respected Bilal. His mere presence was a testament to the transformative power of faith. Among the Muhajirun and the Ansar, among the rich and the poor, Bilal walked as an equal, not because the world had changed, but because Islam had changed him, and through him helped change the world. His voice, once silenced by oppression, had become a guiding sound for an entire nation. As the Muslim community settled in Medina and the foundations of a new society began to take shape, there arose a need to organize and structure the daily acts of worship. The 5 daily prayers had been established, but how to call the believers together at their appointed times remained a question. It was then that a beautiful moment unfolded. one that would forever link the voice of Bilal Ibn Rabah to the soul of Islamic devotion. The call to prayer, or adhan, was introduced through a divine dream seen by several companions and confirmed by the Prophet Muhammad. A call that would invite people not just to stand shoulder to shoulder in prayer, but to remember their Creator in unity and peace. When it came time to choose who would carry this responsibility, the Prophet did not hesitate. He turned to Bilal, the man who had once cried Ahad through pain and fire, and said, "Stand, O Bilal, and call the people to prayer." Bilal's voice, deep and resonant, rose for the first time in Medina, echoing across the palm groves and sand. Allahu Akbar, Allahu Akbar. God is the greatest. His call was not merely a vocal announcement. It was a symbol of everything Islam stood for. The oppressed now led the call. The once enslaved now summoned the free. And the man whose cries were once met with lashes now inspired tears of devotion. Every time Bilal ascended the high point to make the adhan, the community listened with awe. His voice stirred the hearts of men, women, and children alike. It reminded them not only of their duty to pray, but of the journey they had taken together, from persecution in Mecca to the unity of Medina. His adhan was a rhythm of mercy and strength, calling the world to remember the One. To this day, Bilal is remembered not only as the first Muezzin in Islam, but as the embodiment of spiritual victory. His voice marked the beginning of a tradition that would continue across lands and centuries. 5 times a day, from minarets around the world, the echoes of Bilal's legacy still live on. When the Prophet Muhammad passed away, the world seemed to grow quiet for those who had walked beside him. For Bilal Ibn Rabah, the loss was not just of a leader. It was the departure of the man who had freed him, uplifted him, and loved him like a brother. The light of Medina dimmed in his heart, and every corner of the city reminded him of the one he had called his beloved prophet. His voice, once strong and steady in the call to prayer, now trembled with grief. On the day after the prophet's death, the companions urged Bilal to call the adhan as he had always done. He tried. He stood and began the call, but when he reached the name of Muhammad, his voice broke. The weight of that moment overwhelmed him, and tears filled the eyes of everyone who heard him. He could not continue. From that day forward, he chose never to make the adhan again. To call the prayer without the presence of the Prophet felt too painful to bear. Bilal sought peace away from Medina. He left for Syria, where he continued to serve the growing Muslim community with humility and devotion. Though far from the city he loved, he carried with him the legacy of those early days, the truth, the struggle, and the memories of the messenger. He fought in battles, gave in charity, and reminded others of the spirit of the Prophet not through sermons, but through his actions. Years passed, but his name remained etched in the hearts of the believers. One day, during a visit to Medina, he was asked once more to call the adhan. After much persuasion, he agreed. As his voice rose once again, the city was overcome with emotion. Old companions wept openly. The sound brought back memories so vivid that it felt as if the Prophet himself had returned. Bilal eventually returned to Syria, where he spent the rest of his days in quiet worship and remembrance. When his final moments came, he smiled and said, "Tomorrow I will meet Muhammad and his companions." With that, he departed this world, his voice silent, but his legacy eternal. Bilal Ibn Rabah's legacy is not written in stone or carved into monuments, but it lives in the hearts of millions who remember his name with reverence. His life is a powerful reminder that dignity is not given by man, but honored by God. Born a slave and marginalized by society, Bilal rose through faith to become one of the most beloved figures in Islamic history. His journey from the chains of bondage to the minaret of Medina stands as a testimony to the transformative power of belief and the promise of justice in Islam. Bilal's voice was more than sound. It was a declaration that the message of Islam belongs to all people, regardless of race, status, or background. He became the embodiment of what the Prophet Muhammad preached in his final sermon, that no Arab is superior to a non-Arab and no white person to a black person, except by piety and righteousness. Through Bilal, that message was not just spoken but lived. Generations after him would draw strength from his story. For those who have ever felt overlooked, oppressed, or voiceless, Bilal's life offers hope. He is a symbol of resistance to tyranny, of inner strength in the face of humiliation, and of unwavering devotion even under the cruelest conditions. His name continues to inspire not just Muslims, but all who seek justice and equality. Every time the call to prayer echoes through the world, from the deserts of Arabia to the mountains of Indonesia, Bilal's legacy breathes again. His cry of Allahu Akbar still reverberates through time, reminding us that true nobility is not found in status or lineage, but in the heart that bows before the Creator. In the story of Islam, Bilal's voice will never fade. The legacy of Bilal Ibn Rabah is one of courage, faith, and the triumph of the human spirit. Though born into slavery and considered among the lowest in Meccan society, Bilal became one of the most honored companions of the Prophet Muhammad. His life shattered the false standards of superiority built on race, lineage, and wealth, proving that in Islam, the measure of a person lies in their faith and character. From the hot sands where he was tortured to the minarets from which he called the faithful to prayer, Bilal's journey became a symbol of divine justice and spiritual elevation. Bilal's story has endured through the centuries not because of grand wealth or political power, but because of his unwavering devotion to the truth. He stood firm when others wavered, enduring cruelty that would have broken most, all for the love of Allah. His repetition of Ahad, Ahad under torture did more than declare God's oneness. It declared the unbreakable strength of belief. His role as the first Muezzin gave a voice to the voiceless and proved that Islam uplifts those whom the world seeks to keep down. To this day, his name is mentioned with admiration in homes, mosques, and books across the world. For those who suffer oppression, Bilal represents resilience. For those who feel unseen, he is a reminder that Allah sees every heart. And for those who strive for sincerity, his life is a blueprint of quiet strength and unwavering truth. His legacy is not just historical, it is deeply spiritual. Every call to prayer that rises into the sky carries within it an echo of Bilal's voice, a voice that once broke through chains to proclaim the greatness of God. His story is not over. It lives on with every believer who dares to stand firm in faith. The story of Bilal Ibn Rabah is more than a chapter in history. It is a living testament to the power of faith, dignity, and divine justice. From the depths of slavery to the heights of honor, Bilal's journey reminds us that no soul is insignificant in the sight of God. In a society built on hierarchy and oppression, he stood as a silent revolution, proving that true nobility comes not from race, wealth, or status, but from the sincerity of one's heart and the firmness of one's belief. Bilal's courage was not born of power, but of truth. He had no army, no allies in high places, and no worldly influence. Yet he shook the pride of the Quraysh with a single word, Ahad. That cry, spoken in pain but filled with conviction, carried a weight greater than any sword. It was the voice of a man who had seen beyond this world and clung to the eternal. In every moment of his story, from the burning sands of Mecca to the sacred city of Medina, Bilal lived what many only speak: complete submission to the One. His life forces us to reflect on our own. Do we stand firm when tested? Do we value faith over comfort? Do we see the soul before we see the status? Bilal's legacy calls us to rise above the surface of this world and anchor ourselves in what is true and lasting. He did not chase fame, yet he is remembered. He did not seek glory, yet his name lives on. As the Adhan echoes across the earth, it carries the soul of a man who once whispered God's name through cracked lips and bruised ribs. That voice still calls us, not just to prayer, but to rise, to believe, and to stand unwavering in the truth.